Welcome back. I'm your host, Gavon, and today's guest is Andjelic. This is part two of us talking about the Great Reshuffle. Now that some time has passed and the dust has settled, the Great Reshuffle is about the time in the fashion industry where there are new appointments for creative directors at major fashion houses, and where we've been talking about the impact of these changes on the industry, the balance between brand heritage and modern creativity, as well as the broader cultural impacts of these shifts. Anna, welcome back. How are you feeling? What have you been thinking about since we last spoke?
You don't want to know, Gavon. Thanks for having me. I'm kidding. I cannot wait for us to unpack because since you and I last talked, Grace Bonner was announced as new creative director of menswear Hermes. And that's one of those things when the entire fashion industry had completely same positive response. And that is very hard to achieve these days. Like, yes, we're all used to like negativity, but this was so positive. Everyone was so happy and encouraging and kind of like this is the right direction. So
Yeah.
that's to Grace and to Hermes. What are
Yes,
your
yes,
thoughts?
yes. I feel like this felt like Hermes playing the long game. Hermes has always played the long game. They've never been about the moment and just about being timely. They're also about being timeless. And Grace's just design, like the way that she moves through this industry is so intentional. There's so much poise. There's so much storytelling in her designs that I think her addition to Hermes was unforeseen, but just felt like a brand who gets it. Like I felt like that was the sentiment. They get it. We're not looking for the same recycled aesthetic. We want something that feels tomorrow.
Oh my God, I love that so much, especially what you said about the long game, because the previous director of menswear was there 37 years. And I think that Grace was not born then, or maybe just was born when
Yeah.
that appointment, when that, appointment first started. For, that's number one. The second, what I'm seeing is like, I can see only Hermes doing that because they just seem not to they pay attention to culture, but they don't seem to pay attention to fashion industry. And I know, I always remember this quote from the family, from the CEO saying we are not luxury, we are exceptional quality. And I think that became so pertinent at the time when luxury started. And I used that in 2019, so 6 years ago. And that's when luxury started bifurcating so much, when you have this like collabs and Louis Vuitton spectacle and opening new stores and slapping logo on everything as definition of like where luxury industry was evolving, traditional luxury industry, luxury brands. And then at the same time, there was this idea of exceptional craftsmanship in terms of wellness and travel and hospitality and home decor and even clothes like Kate or the Row or that like minimalism pared down aesthetic that is just very paying attention to materials, to fabrics, Brunello, and so on. So that was very kind of astute way of saying and intuitively understand immediately what they meant by it. And I do think that is not surprising that they would do something like that. Instead of going to musical chairs of creative directors, they're going to say, hey, we actually want someone who is very attuned to a subculture through her origins, through her designs, because in her designs, they're marrying contemporary with her heritage, in cultural heritage, in such a non-obtruse, like in a way that's not shouting. It's all about designs and details, and she's original thinker. So it's such a great fit when
Yeah.
you start unpacking it, because that there is that intellectual component to her designs that a lot of designers don't have.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. There's with a brand, to your point, with a brand like Hermes, they're not under financial pressure like the rest of these other brands. So they can think with a little bit more clarity and more about that long-term vision. And then Grace definitely is bridging generations. And that's what brands really need right now, because I was really thinking about this too. Like, who's the new luxury, or what is luxury consumer like today? These creative directors, who are they trying to court? I'm trying to figure out, like, who, with this appointment, who are you trying to reach? Because now fashion is like football, where we're watching, where do the players go play next, and what do they bring to this house?
Mm.
Before, like with Virgil, it was his audience. It wasn't so much, it was his design sort of eye, but it was more like his audience. He was probably the first creative director, artistic director that was probably picked because he brings eyeballs, he brings this tapped in subculture that you even talk about with Grace Wells Bonner. She brings this force with her, that we probably weren't evaluating 10 years ago. So it's interesting now to see that craftsmanship still being prized at Hermes, but this wink to the future and understanding like how fashion plays in this world.
There is definitely that, and I just don't think that she's, for better or for worse, I think for better, as massive as Virgil, because she's been doing this for a really long time. And she's always been more of that niche designer, if you know, you know. And she has more of that the raw quality, which is that going under the radar and focusing on her craft and her point of view. So she was more steeped in a very specific subculture. But I think that's even almost better in today's culture, because she really mastered the knowledge of her audience, and that connection with that subculture is genuine and organic. And when you see what she did with how she dressed Lewis Hamilton, comes from a similar subculture, but then you have that subculture on a global scale, which I think is sort of better than having mass culture. It's better having one aesthetic and point of view that gets that global prominence. There is a difference. One is coming from very specific, again, subcultural, they have their rituals, their taste, their history, their heritage, their knowledge, their aesthetics. And so then when you take that on the global scale, it doesn't dilute. When you have mass culture, that's the lowest common denominator. And that's not to say that Virgil was not a genius, because he was. It's just that they're playing in very different cultural fields. One is mass culture, the other is niche culture that has not been made mass. It
Yeah.
just has been made popular, or it's just been made visible.
That's such a good distinction. And like, I feel like underneath all of that is that internet sort of flattening culture, and creative director being able to actually like reinstill subculture through these, different channels, avenues, through their own point of view, through the things that they make. It's like they're actually giving us back what we lost. And I always think about, is that the role of a creative director now? Is it about bringing back what we lost, because we're moving in such a fast rate, and the headlines can skew perception so quickly? There's the source of truth sort of stays constant throughout, and like I'm seeing more and more like the role of the creative director, like a Demna, feel it starts to bleed borderline like entertainment spectacle maker, which is important, but like it starts to bleed borderline to this stage and performance, which is appropriate, but we've also seen it dilute. And so I also see the Grace Wells Bonner sort of approach, which is right now it feels less spectacle and feels so much more like intention in actually building things that will stand the test of time and won't.
Yeah, because her shows are actually not fashion shows, they're presentations. And I just think that's very aligned with what Hermes does, in a sense of their own point of view that does not necessarily follows trends. It doesn't set trends, but it doesn't also follow or amplify trends. They're doing their own thing. They know their own audience. They're telling their own story. And that she's, if anything, she's that great storyteller, because she's very cerebral in her design. That is, again, I don't think that any other house except maybe Chanel, but they got the best among them in a sense of, like the popular to lead the entire house could have done that, because just that sort of intention doesn't exist in Caring or LVMH at all.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I'm also thinking about like the talent pipeline. So you have a Grace Wells Bonner, but I wonder who's gonna come next. Like it'll be so interesting to see like the future generations look at like they have so many examples. You have a Grace Wells Bonner, you have a Virgil. Like these are very different lanes. You also have a Matthew Blazy, a Jonathan Anderson. There's so many examples of how to go from a very like emerging to now leading the next phase of a heritage brand. It's so cool.
I think that's what's cool. And then the other thing that is really relevant is what I really love what Bruno Pavlovsky said recently in his interview with Le Figaro, is how, whereas Matthew Blasy's appointment is obviously monumental and a fantastic direction and decision for the brand, it's the designer alone could decide the business or the brand future of a company.
Mm,
And that's what I learned in my work in practice by simply seeing how the product, the brand, and the business need to all pull their weight and work in sync. And I'm glad that Bruno Pavlovsky, who is president of fashion at Chanel and who could have easily taken an easy like stick and said, "Oh my God," he was like, "This is amazing that we have someone who is so strong creatively." But the fact that the days of Karl Lagerfeld, when you have like one man's show, no matter how amazing, they're gone. It's actually, oh, what is the channel planning in terms of, do you have wholesale? Do you have online? Do you have your own stores? How is that business managed? How is merchandising managed? How is the back office managed? How is the growth strategy managed? Like all the what we call like boring stuff. That is what defines the success of the company. The designer is the supply chain, the distribution, all of that is there. The simple planning, how much of each you need to buy for each of the channels, how do you predict demand? It's the nuts and bolts of business that need to be modernized, and he really clearly recognizes that basically it's very naive to think, oh, now we have a creative director, it's amazing. And it does seem, when you see what Gucci, what other brands have been doing, they're like, oh, we just need to have an amazing creative director and everything is going to fall in place. Yes, having an amazing creative director is going to increase desirability, but like, how do you manage the desirability? How do you create it? How do you organize it? How you operationalize it? How do you extend it? How do you grow it? That's all of those are business questions, and that's everything to do outside of the creative department.
yeah, it's like the show is just, it's like the 1 second in the hour timeline of running this annual race.
And also, success of a show, it doesn't mean anything. I think it's very glib to think that it got good reviews. It's not smart to use that as a measure of success, because measure of success is sales. So if you have amazing sales, and even if a show was badly reviewed, and I don't even know what it means anymore, because shows are reviewed on social, they're reviewed by all those creators and commentators that you see in your TikTok feed, that you see in your Instagram feed, but that has so little bearing on what the people who are actual customers. I'm not talking about people with no money who are on TikTok. I'm talking with actual high net worth individuals who are used to buying Chanel, who are used to buying Hermes, who are used to buying Gucci, if they're going to buy. But that also is so much up to channel planning, up to merchandising, up to demand management and prediction, and up to business management and strategic planning and marketing. Obviously, then it has to do with the like just feedback on a show. So I just think that we're just too myopic and see, oh my God, like for example, Versace. People are like, oh, what is going on? Collection is really well done. And saw it in person and it's very variable and the materials are amazing. And I guarantee you it's going to find audience. There's enough of the cues and codes of the brand that are recognizably Versace and it's new. And fashion, especially Italian fashion, they don't like change. And luckily, those reviews mean nothing to the end customer.
I feel like what I'm picking up on is like how that vision needs to meet those consumers through the right channels, whether it's retail, digital, in person, but also like, I'm also thinking like how much of their time is actually like atelier product development, creativity focus versus boardroom meetings, the boring stuff. Like, I wonder how much it's actually getting.
I think it's more about recognizing the design is one component of luxury business. It's not the component. So back at the time when the Coco Chanel was alive, and Saint Laurent was alive, with Balenciaga was alive, they had their own ateliers. So obviously they were the most important. They were running their own businesses. Those were tiny ateliers, tiny. And the way they ran their business was to remain tiny. So when they died, when those brands went to the ground, and that's why they were up to sell Dior, that for Arnaud to scoop them all up, because they were just not ran as businesses. They were ran as art projects, or if they were businesses, but they were
Yeah,
small
they were
businesses.
scrappy.
Well, for like an atelier. And they were more, like craftsmanship. It's almost like craft studios. So now, if you want to create that into some global success, well, you need to run it as a business. So in that sense, the creative director at the center is just not gonna work. It's one of the components of success. It's not the component of success. So the question is not for that creative director to sit at board meetings, but your organization to be organized in such a way to ensure success.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. That's interesting. Cause yeah, I was seeing it from like, this is the table. Let's bring the atelier closer to the table. But what I'm actually hearing is this is the atelier. Let's bring the table closer to
Yes, let's rally
room.
around. Exactly.
I
Yes,
love
exactly.
that.
Yeah. So that's a modern organization. And like, I think that Bruno Pavlovsky really, I mean, he knows business, and everyone who spent any time in any fashion organization, I was like, well, it's not really like marketing and brand and creative and design. They're big part, but if the business is not pulling its weight, if merchandising is not, its planning is not, its channels are not, then it's just not gonna happen.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering too, like this now that the honeymoon phase is over, like, right? Like we had this moment where we were all engulfed in it. Like now there's the second show that has to come. And then even the third, like the question still becomes like, how do you maintain the business? How do you balance that all together? And it sounds like you need to have systems in place, systems to support the creative, but also systems to support the business that are congruent with each other, that feed each other, that communicate with each other. And then from there, like, where do you place bets? Where do you innovate? Because I think there's this component of being wrong today so you can be right tomorrow. And that's always an interesting dance with quarterly reporting and looking for returns. Like, and we talked about this in last year when we did the first podcast, which is how do you know when to experiment versus how do you know when to just plug and chug and keep the thing going because it's driving revenue versus when it's time to really change.
I mean, it's again super naive to think that you can turn a brand around in a year, even in 2 years. You need 3 to 5 years. And I think at least I'm glad that like some of luxury fashion brands realize that, like Demna and then Jonathan Anderson and even Matthew Blasi is incredibly talented. And so he was like, I'm not going to even look at the archives. I got overwhelmed. I'm going to put. So it's just takes time to evolve that vision, and then takes even more time for consumers to get acquainted. Like in fashion, when you first time see something and you don't like it, then you see it multiple times, then you see it on people you admire, style you admire, and then you start liking. So that's true innovation.
Yeah.
If you would like things all the time, it just wouldn't be innovation. So I think just if you kind of want to put forward something that's truly new, when you see Miu Miu silhouettes and looks, it's not always immediately, oh my God, I really love that old lady cardigan situation. But then you see it a lot and then you start liking it. And I think more important is really, again, what is merchandising? How do you build a demand? How do you manage supply? Because for Miu Miu last year, when they launched for the first time their boat shoes, they had only one pair in each size. And then the next drop was later. So they they could have released all pairs immediately and everyone would be wearing them. It would be amazing for them. But they wanted to kind of like manage the demand through scarcity and extend it to this year again. So you see, these are business decisions. No wonder Miu Miu is 41% up. It keeps lights on. Other was up, I think, 9% thanks to Miu Miu.
That's so managing demand is super critical. Like, how do you create it and then how do you manage it?
That's it. That's it. That's it. Because there is clearly demand for Miu Miu products, and they just chose to not to manage it in a way that to creates more demand, not
Mm,
jump on to flood the market like what LVMH usually does with its brands, or what Gucci was doing, or
right. It's like, is it manufactured scarcity or is it true authentic scarcity? And does it even matter?
Prada is a massive brand. They can create enough.
Right. I also feel like the audience doesn't, I don't think they can tell the difference and I don't even think they care. I feel like to them it feels the same.
I mean, like that made me run around Europe in search for those. I wanted them so much. I'm not making this up, honestly.
That is crazy. I mean, that is a true sort of product of luxury, is that
Yes, you can't say
unattainable.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. But I wonder just that we keep coming back, I feel like, to the consumer of today. And it seems like we sit on interesting parts of the spectrum where you've seen so much of this luxury in store. You've seen it ebb and flow. And I'm coming in from this vantage point of I like the promise of luxury, but I'm so disillusioned by what has been in this environment. And I know brands have to be thinking about that as well. The new generation of luxury consumers and how they soothe it. Is it with a Grace Wells Bonner? Or is it with a Matthew Blazy? Or, it's like, how do you, or is it more fundamental and it's actually merchandising, it's product storytelling? Like, I wonder where that taking the consumer along the journey comes into play because you're sort of
It's not
touching on that
just
a bit.
merchandising, because you see, like merchandising can be, it's literally all those three functions: the brand, the business, the product working in sync and working together and creatively solving problems. Because if one of those aspects is too strong, other two are going to suffer. So if merchandising is dominating, like look at J. Crew, for example, they're suffocated by their merchandising because they literally like design literally follows what worked in what merchandising. Oh, this worked in the past, you need to create more of that. And I encountered that at Banana, how merchandisers are running the show in a sense, because like, oh, you're going to create everything in burgundy because, and you're like, look around and I'm like, what's going on? No one wants that. And then it's surprised when it doesn't sell, and then you put it on discounting, and then it's a dead spiral. And instead of taking calculated risks. and then having a very clear also product pyramid when you say we can take calculated risks in the collection area. When we're trending, we are not going to touch our hero products, we're not going to touch our foundation. Those are NOS, never out of stock, so that's where merchandisers really are. Oh, these are our best sellers, we need to keep them year on year. But then, you know what I mean, that's how everything is interconnected. And the problem is that most of organizations are still siloed. I mean, there are some that are, you know, clearly moving, like, and there is clearly impetus, but usually they're so siloed, so you don't even have this conversation.
So good. Last question. Where do you think we're headed with all of this? You know, it's the end of the year, we're closing out, we're looking to 2026. What are you hearing things? Are you seeing things? What are you feeling for next year that's coming?
Well, I'm going to quote the woman I met at the Gucci store in Milan at Via Monte Napoleone. Demna put his new collection on the ground level, on the street level, and Sabato was downstairs for 2 weeks. So, you know, usually you have private viewing and private showroom for private clients, but he wanted everyone to see it. He wanted it to make accessible to everyone, which I think it's great. The store associates were very knowledgeable, and I got into conversation with one of them, and she was really lovely. I was asking her what's selling best and so on. La Bomba went immediately. That's what she said. The woman tried on the La Bomba look with the fur and the gold chain, and she was like, "I'm taking it." And which is exactly the point. If those are, it's a mood, you know, like you step into the mood, you know. And she was saying, like, what I'm seeing here, I hope this, like, of course, Italian is going to say that this is a renaissance. And the renaissance means there are all those creators who have their own distinct visions and they're all creating together. And there is this like great revival and innovation and creative. And I just liked, I don't know if it's true or not, but I just like that sentiment. And you could kind of see a lot of good stuff, really creative stuff on the runaways, you know, like it or don't like it. And I see a lot of old school people who are stuck in the past, like criticizing it, but you have to be open minded. And I think that open mindedness is what brought us Renaissance and all the wonderful things we did.
Oh my gosh. That would be beautiful to like see this wellspring of just creativity and innovation. I agree. And I think everyone is thirsty for it at this present moment. I think we've been dogged down by politics for this past year, and reaction next year should be about freedom, liberation.
Unity and dreaming, and because it's called humanism and Renaissance, like humans is the center of the world and nature and abundance.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, for joining us for a part two. It's always a pleasure having you. I'm looking forward to our next conversation in 2026, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about this renaissance.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me, Gavon. It's always a pleasure.